The chair was heavier than it looked, not because of the wood, not because of the padding, not because of the bolts anchoring it to the floor or the polished brass plate screwed into its back, because of what it meant. For 23 years, it had been mine. Front row, center, facing the room, facing the cameras, facing the people who nodded when I spoke, even when they didn't fully understand what I was saying, especially then. The chair was not special in design. Dark walnut frame, navy upholstery, nothing extravagant. It mattered because of context, because when people walked into the room and saw where it was placed, they understood where power lived. Or they used to. The banner behind the stage said, "Thank you for everything," in letters big enough to be read from the parking lot. Someone had paid extra for lighting. Warm tones, soft gold, positioned at just the right angles. The kind of lighting that smooths edges. The kind that turns wrinkles into character and gray hair into earned wisdom. It was flattering. It was also final. I stood near the aisle with my hands folded in front of me, smiling the practice smile you use when you know you are being watched. When you know there are cameras somewhere, even if you can't see them. When you know people are studying your posture, your expression, the set of your shoulders, trying to decide what narrative they'll repeat later. Retirement. Transition. Legacy. That was the word they kept using. Legacy. Then my son-in-law leaned in. He didn't whisper. He didn't lower his voice. He placed his hand on the back of my chair, like it belonged to him, like it had always belonged to him, and said clearly enough for the first 3 rows to hear, "You don't need to be up front anymore." No malice in the tone. That was the worst part. Calm. Casual. As if he were reminding someone to turn off a light or move a coat. There was a half-second pause. Then someone laughed. Not loud, not proud, nervous. A woman from marketing. I knew her name once. I had approved her hire. She covered her mouth too late, like she'd realized halfway through that laughter was a choice, not a reflex. I looked at him. He was wearing the suit I had helped him pick 3 years earlier, back when he still asked my opinion. Navy. Slim cut. Too tight in the shoulders, a mistake I'd pointed out at the time. He'd insisted it would break in. It never had. He'd lost weight recently. Stress, maybe. Or vanity. His jawline looked sharper now. His smile was perfect, polished, teeth white enough to look almost unreal under the stage lights. My daughter stood beside him, her hand rested on his arm, not gripping, just placed there, possessive without effort. She did not look at me. She was staring past the stage, eyes unfocused, like she was watching something only she could see, or like she was refusing to see anything at all. I stepped aside. That part is important. I didn't argue. I didn't joke. I didn't ask him to repeat himself. I didn't remind him whose company this was, or whose name was still on half the original contracts, or who had signed the loan papers when banks still laughed at our projections. I stepped aside. The chair creaked softly as he sat down. Someone clapped. Then another person. Then several. The sound rolled forward like a wave that had been waiting for permission. I walked to the end of the row and took an empty seat near the aisle. Plastic. Lightweight. Temporary. Someone had added it at the last minute when attendance numbers came in higher than expected. No nameplate. No polish. Just a chair. I crossed my legs and folded my hands again. I let him enjoy the moment. They called his name. He stood smoothly, straightened his jacket, waved like he was used to it, like he'd been practicing in mirrors. He thanked the room. He thanked the board. He thanked my wife. He thanked my daughter. He did not thank me. That was fine. I watched him talk. I watched the veins in his neck stand out when he leaned into the microphone. I watched the way he glanced toward the cameras before answering questions, always checking his angles. I watched the room. Who leaned forward? Who avoided eye contact? Who smiled too hard? Who checked their phone? You learn things when you are being erased. People think learning stops when authority ends. It doesn't. That's when the useful information starts coming in. My wife sat 3 seats away from him. She wore the dark blue dress she always wore when she wanted to look harmless. Conservative neckline, soft fabric, no jewelry except her wedding band. Her hands rested folded in her lap, perfectly still. She met my eyes once, just for a breath. Then she looked away. I smiled at her. She didn't smile back. Good. When the applause finally faded and the music started, something upbeat, carefully chosen to feel optimistic, I stood and walked toward the exit. No one stopped me. A few people nodded awkwardly, like they were passing a man in a hospital hallway whose chart they didn't want to read. Outside, the night air was cool. It smelled like asphalt and cut grass. The building's glass reflected the lights behind me, soft and warm and false. I stood under a street lamp and listened to the muffled celebration through the glass. I pulled my phone out and checked the message again. Confirmed. Effective immediately. I put the phone away. Inside, my son-in-law was still talking. As the story unfolds, hit the hype button, like, subscribe, and write in the comments. Would you forgive them or walk away? People think moments like that break you. They imagine something snapping, a shout, a glass thrown, a scene that becomes a story people retell later with excitement in their voices. What actually happens is quieter. You start noticing details. The next morning, I woke before my alarm. 6:30. Same as always. The house was quiet. Too quiet. My daughter and her husband had stayed the night. Their guest room door was closed. I could hear the faint hum of his phone charger through the wall. A soft, electronic breathing. I made coffee. Black. No sugar. I drank it standing at the counter, staring at the spot on the wall where the paint had chipped years ago when we moved the fridge. I'd meant to fix it. I never had. My wife came in a few minutes later. She didn't ask how I was. She poured herself coffee and leaned against the counter, one hip resting against the granite like she had done 1,000 times before. "They think you're done," she said. I nodded. "They think you're tired," she continued, "and sentimental." I smiled slightly. "Am I?" She looked at me then. Really looked. The way she had when we were younger, and deciding whether to buy this house even though it was more than we could afford. The way she had when I came home late with bad news and needed someone who could hear it without flinching. "No," she said. "You're angry." I shrugged. "That too." She opened the drawer and took out the folder. White, plain, no labels. "You signed everything?" she asked. "Every line." She nodded once. "Good." We drank our coffee in silence. From the hallway, I could hear my son-in-law moving around. The shower turned on, water pressure steady, confident. At the office later that day, I took the back elevator instead of the front. Old habit. The kind you develop when you don't want to be seen arriving or leaving. My office had already been reassigned. Not officially, not on paper. But my name was gone from the door. The plant was gone. The framed photo of the original crew, taken in front of the first warehouse, all of us squinting into the sun, leaned against the wall instead of hanging. A young man from facilities stood inside, holding a tablet. "Oh," he said. "I didn't know you were still using this space." I looked around. The desk was cleared. Too clean. Like a hotel room after checkout. "I'll be out in a minute," I said. He nodded, visibly relieved. People like it when you make things easy for them. I walked down the hall to the smaller office at the end. No windows, no nameplate. The place they give you when they want you to disappear without firing you. I sat down and turned on the computer. 3 new emails waited, all marked urgent, legal, operations, my son-in-law. His subject line read, "Moving forward." I opened legal first. Everything was in motion now. Somewhere deep in the building, a forklift beeped as it reversed. A sound that used to mean progress. I leaned back and closed my eyes. I let them move forward. They had no idea where the floor ended. By the end of the week, my name was still on the website. That mattered. People underestimate websites. They think they're decoration, marketing fluff, something interns update. They're not. They're contracts written in pixels. Founder, majority stakeholder, strategic advisor. Those words stayed because removing them would have required a conversation, and conversations were the one thing my son-in-law avoided, unless he believed he'd already won. I watched from a distance. Distance doesn't mean absence. It sharpens the view. I parked 2 blocks away and walked the rest. Not for exercise, for observation. Who arrived early? Who arrived late? Who smoked behind the loading bay? Who made phone calls from their cars? Inside, I spoke little. When asked for input, I gave short answers. Neutral. Safe. The kind that sound cooperative while offering nothing. My son-in-law filled the silence easily. He loved hearing himself talk. He'd adopted phrases recently. Synergy, alignment, scalable vision. Words that sounded impressive until you tried to attach them to reality. One afternoon, he called an emergency meeting. The boardroom was packed. Too packed. People standing along the walls pretending they hadn't chosen seats based on visibility. He stood at the head of the table, hands braced on the surface like a man about to announce a miracle. "We need to modernize," he said. "We need to move fast." Slides appeared. Rebranding, restructuring, leadership realignment. My name did not appear once. When it ended, he stopped me near the door. "You good?" he asked, clapping a hand on my shoulder. Territorial. "Of course," I said. "You're doing great." He smiled. That night, my phone rang. "I got the documents," the voice said. "And?" I asked. "They're airtight." I thanked him. At home, my wife sat at the dining table, laptop open. "They're starting to feel it," she said. "Good." She closed the laptop. "He won't go quietly." I know. We slept well that night. The first crack didn't announce itself. It never does. It showed up as a delay. One shipment, then another. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that triggered alarms or emergency meetings. Just enough to create irritation. Enough for people to start checking timelines twice. Enough to force someone to make a call they wouldn't normally make. My son-in-law blamed vendors, weather, port congestion, a regional labor shortage. He said all the right things. He said them confidently. He said them fast, as if speed itself could substitute for accuracy. Most people nodded. They always do at first, except the ones who had been there long enough to know how thin the margins actually were. The ones who remembered what happened the last time operations started improvising instead of executing. That afternoon, I walked the warehouse. No announcement, no entourage, no schedule. Just me, the concrete floor, and the familiar smell of oil, dust, and cardboard. People noticed. They always did. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forklifts slowed. Someone straightened instinctively, like they'd just realized they were being observed by gravity itself. Some smiled. Some looked away. A few nodded with something close to relief. Near Bay 6, one of the supervisors caught up to me. He walked beside me for a moment before speaking, like he was timing the risk. "They're changing procedures," he said quietly. "Cutting corners." "Document everything," I replied without breaking stride. He hesitated. "You coming back?" I stopped, turned to him. "I'm already here," I said. That night, my daughter came over alone. She didn't take her coat off. She sat on the edge of the couch and clasped her hands together like she was bracing for impact. "He says you're undermining him," she said. "I haven't said a word," I replied. "He thinks you're manipulating people." I smiled slightly. "Is that what he does?" She flinched. "This didn't have to be a fight," she said. "No," I agreed. "It didn't." She stood suddenly, anger breaking through restraint. "Why are you doing this?" I considered telling her everything. The clauses, the signatures, the way momentum works when it's allowed to roll downhill. Instead, I said, "Because you let him take my seat." She stared at me. Then she left without another word. 2 days later, the first board member called me directly, off the record, concerned, confused. I listened. I asked questions. I offered no conclusions. That night, my son-in-law showed up unannounced. He didn't knock. He was angry, not loud yet, but vibrating. The kind of anger that hasn't decided whether it's going to explode or calcify. "We need to talk," he said. "Do we?" I replied. He stepped closer, too close. "You think you're smarter than me?" he said. "No," I said calmly. "I know I'm more patient." His hand twitched. My wife appeared in the doorway. "Leave," she said. He did. The second crack was public. That made it harder to ignore. A trade publication ran a piece questioning the company's new direction. Nothing aggressive, no accusations, just carefully chosen words. Industry concern, strategic uncertainty, anonymous sources. My son-in-law called a press meeting within hours. I watched it online. He stood under bright lights, jaw tight, smile fixed too firmly in place. "This company is stronger than ever," he said. "Change always scares people." The reporter asked a follow-up. He snapped back too quickly, too sharp, defensive. People noticed. That afternoon, security stopped me at the front desk. "New policy," the guard said apologetically. "Of course," I replied. I turned and walked out. Across the street, my phone buzzed. Final confirmation. I stood there for a long moment, watching the building's glass reflect the sky. Blue, calm, indifferent. Inside, alarms were about to go off, not literal ones. Worse, reputation, authority, control. I crossed the street and kept walking. Behind me, the building hummed, unaware that its foundation had already shifted. By Monday morning, the phones were ringing before 8. Not mine, theirs. I knew because I could hear it through the walls. Not the sound of a single device, but the rhythm of it. Overlapping vibrations, short bursts cut off too quickly, the pause, then another wave. The kind of pattern that only happens when people are calling upward, not sideways, when they are trying to reach someone they believe still has answers. I stayed in the kitchen, operations first, then legal, then compliance. Someone from compliance who had never called me directly in 20 years, whose name I knew only because it appeared once a year on a distribution list I rarely read. The escalation path was revealing itself in real time, and I let it play out without interruption. I didn't answer any of them. I made breakfast instead. Eggs, toast, black coffee, no sugar. The pan was already warm when I cracked the shells. The sound was steady and controlled, the way it always had been when I cooked. I moved without rushing, without hesitation. Butter melted, eggs set, toast popped up with a dry click that felt oddly decisive. I sat down and ate slowly, cutting each bite cleanly, listening to the radio murmur about traffic accidents on roads I didn't take anymore, and weather fronts that would pass by after noon, as if the day itself were reminding everyone that disruptions are temporary. My wife sat across from me, scrolling through her phone. She wasn't reading anything in particular. I could tell by the way her thumb moved, by the pauses that meant she was thinking instead of consuming. Every so often she glanced up, not at me exactly, but in my direction, as if checking whether I had changed position. "He called my sister," she said, finally. I didn't look up right away. I finished chewing, swallowed, wiped my mouth with a napkin. "Did she answer?" I asked. "She listened," my wife said. Then she hung up. I nodded. That sounded like her sister. Polite until politeness stopped serving a purpose. There was more she wanted to say. I could feel it in the way she exhaled through her nose, the way she set her phone down screen first on the table as if to neutralize it. "He's scared," she added. "I've never heard him like that." I took a sip of coffee. It was hot, bitter, grounding. "He should be," I said, not unkindly. We ate the rest of the meal in silence, not the strained kind, The familiar kind that comes from years of shared mornings, from knowing when conversation will only dilute what is already understood. At the office, the atmosphere had changed. It wasn't dramatic. No raised voices in the hallways, no visible panic. Just a subtle recalibration of behavior that people assume goes unnoticed. Conversations dropped an octave when I passed. Doors stayed closed longer than usual. Meetings ran late, then spilled into adjacent rooms instead of ending cleanly. I walked the halls without stopping. No one blocked me, no one challenged me, no one asked where I was going or whether I had an appointment. Authority is strange like that. It leaves echoes even after people think they've taken it away. Even after titles change and org charts get redrawn, the body remembers. The building remembers. People remember who used to sit where, who signed off on what, who decided things that mattered. A junior analyst I didn't recognize pressed herself flat against the wall to let me pass, clutching a folder like a shield. A director who had once avoided my eye contact nodded too quickly, as if late to something urgent. I acknowledged neither. I didn't need to. My son-in-law was in the boardroom. I could hear him through the glass before I reached the corner. His voice carried, sharp with effort, polished anger leaking through a layer of professionalism he was no longer able to maintain. "We're exposed," he was saying. "I don't care how you phrase it. I don't care whose idea it was. If this gets out, we're all exposed." There was a pause. Someone else spoke, quieter, attempting to soften the moment. He interrupted them. "No," he said. "That's not acceptable. We don't wait. We move now." I stopped just short of the door. I could picture the room without seeing it. The long table, the screen at the far end with a deck half finished, bullet points rearranged but not resolved. People leaning forward, hands clasped, eyes darting toward the door every time footsteps passed. I didn't go in. Instead, I turned and walked toward the stairwell, taking it 2 steps at a time up to the 3rd floor. The old storage room was exactly where it had always been. End of the hall, past the offices that had been converted and reconverted so many times they no longer belonged to any one department. The sign on the door still read, "Archive," though no one had archived anything there in years. The lock resisted for half a second, then turned. Inside, the air was stale but dry. Fluorescent lights hummed to life one by one, revealing metal shelves stacked with boxes and binders arranged with a discipline that had gone out of fashion. No color coding, no trendy labels, just dates, reference numbers, and names written in my hand. History. I ran my fingers along the spines as I walked. Contracts, amendments, letters of intent. Things that had once required weeks of negotiation and now existed only as evidence that something had been agreed to, somewhere, by someone who assumed it would never matter again. I pulled out one folder, then another. I sat at the small table in the center of the room and opened them slowly, not because I needed the time, but because the order mattered. Sequence always mattered. Context mattered. I made notes in the margins where I hadn't before, marking connections that had been invisible when everyone involved was aligned. By noon, the first resignation hit. Senior manager, quiet, no explanation. It came through the internal system like a ripple, not an announcement, just an update that required approval and triggered notifications. A line item that could be dismissed as routine if you didn't know what to look for. I closed the folder I was holding and stacked it neatly. By 1, there were rumors. By 2, there were meetings being rescheduled under the guise of availability conflicts. By 3, someone from legal sent out a request for document retention reminders that was phrased too carefully to be accidental. My phone buzzed. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. "Are you doing this?" my daughter asked when I answered. Her voice was tight, controlled. She was trying not to accuse me while doing exactly that. "No," I replied. "They are." Silence stretched between us. I could hear her breathing, uneven now. I imagined her standing in her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, eyes unfocused, replaying conversations from the past week and realizing how much had been said around her without being shared. "You always do this," she said finally. "You say nothing and then act like none of it is your fault." "I haven't acted," I said. "I stopped." "That's the same thing," she snapped. "It isn't," I said, "and you know it." She didn't respond. The call ended without a goodbye. By the time evening came, the building felt hollow. People were still there, but the confidence had drained out of their movements. Laptops stayed open longer. Lights remained on in offices that should have been empty. No one laughed. I left when the sun was low, casting long reflections across the parking lot. That's when I saw him. My son-in-law was leaning against his car, jacket draped over the hood, tie loosened. He straightened when he saw me, stepping into my path with a familiarity he hadn't earned in months. "We need to settle this," he said. His tone suggested negotiation. His eyes suggested something closer to threat. "You already did," I replied. He laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You think you can just walk away?" he said. "After everything?" "I did walk away," I said. "Weeks ago." He reached out and grabbed my sleeve. It wasn't violent. It didn't need to be. It was presumptive. A gesture built on the assumption that physical proximity still gave him leverage. I pushed his hand away. "Do not touch me again," I said. The words landed harder than I expected, not because of volume but because of certainty. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You think this ends well for you?" he asked. I looked at him then, really looked, at the tension in his jaw, at the way his weight shifted from one foot to the other, at the faint tremor in his hand that he hadn't noticed yet. "It already has," I replied. I walked past him without breaking stride. Behind me, he said my name once, then stopped. I didn't turn around. There was nothing left to clarify. At home, the house was quiet. My wife was in the living room, lights low, a book open on her lap she wasn't reading. She looked up when I entered. "Was he there?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She nodded, as if confirming something she had already decided. We didn't talk about it further. There was no need. Some things, once said aloud, lose their shape. That night, my phone stayed face down on the nightstand. It buzzed occasionally, but I didn't reach for it. Whatever messages were coming could wait until morning, or until they no longer mattered. I slept deeply. When I woke, the world felt quieter, not calmer, just quieter, the way a room does after an argument has ended, and everyone involved has left to consider what comes next. I stood by the window and watched the light shift across the street, already knowing that the calls would continue, that meetings would be called, that narratives would be rewritten by people trying to place themselves on the right side of an outcome they could feel approaching. And for the first time in a long while, I felt no urgency to intervene. Things were moving exactly as they should. The board meeting was scheduled for Friday. Mandatory attendance. That word carried weight. Not authority. Obligation. The kind that binds people who would rather be anywhere else, but understand that absence would be interpreted as confession. I arrived early. Old habit. I took a seat at the back of the room, the same plastic chair they had added for overflow weeks earlier. Lightweight, unanchored. The kind that shifts if you move too suddenly. Temporary. People filed in slowly. Board members first, then legal, then operations. Executives hovered near the walls, pretending they were only there to observe. No one sat beside me. That was fine. My son-in-law arrived late. That was new. He walked in fast, eyes already scanning faces, calculating. He didn't apologize. He didn't acknowledge the delay. He launched straight into the presentation like a man sprinting across thin ice. Numbers first, revenue projections, cost reductions, efficiency gains, then promises, then reassurances. He spoke quickly, as if momentum itself might carry him through the gaps. When legal spoke, the room shifted. Careful language, precise phrasing, no accusations. Compliance followed. Operations after that. Each voice measured. Calm. Professional. The tension in the room changed shape. My son-in-law interrupted once, then twice. By the third time, people stopped taking notes. I raised my hand. The room went silent. Not because I demanded it. I would like to clarify something, I said. I stood slowly. No rush. I am still the majority stakeholder, I continued, and as of 2 weeks ago, the controlling interest reverted under the terms we all signed. Papers slid across the table. Copies, originals, attachments. The sound they made was small. The effect was not. Faces drained. A chair scraped. Someone inhaled sharply and forgot to exhale. My son-in-law stood so fast his chair tipped backward. "This is a setup," he said. "No," I replied evenly. "This is governance." Security appeared at the door. Not for me. He looked around, searching for allies. He found none. He left without another word. The fallout was immediate. Calls, messages, draft statements rewritten again and again. People who had avoided eye contact now wanted meetings. People who had nodded quietly now wanted reassurance. I gave none. My phone didn't stop vibrating. It hummed on the kitchen counter like a nervous insect, lighting up the dark every few seconds with names I recognized and numbers I didn't. Board members, former friends, people who had once told me they admired my restraint, people who had once advised me to keep my head down and let things pass. They all wanted to know what came next. I washed my hands slowly, even though they weren't dirty. I dried them with the same towel I had used for years, the one my wife once said I should replace because it was fraying at the edges. I never did. It still worked. Most things did, if you didn't discard them the first time they showed wear. Outside, a car passed, tires on pavement, ordinary life continuing at a pace that felt insulting in its calm. Somewhere, someone was laughing. Somewhere else, a television murmured through an open window. None of it stopped just because the truth had finally been allowed into the room. I silenced the phone, not turned it off. Just enough to remind myself that urgency is often a performance. My daughter came to the house that night. I heard her before I saw her. The door didn't slam. She never slammed doors. She closed it too carefully, the way she had as a child when she wanted to make noise but also wanted to be seen as reasonable. Her footsteps moved through the hallway, paused, then continued toward the kitchen. She didn't sit. "You planned this," she said. "Yes. You let him humiliate you. I let him reveal himself. You destroyed him." I considered that. The word hung between us, heavy with accusation and something else. Fear, maybe. Or the realization that actions have shadows that stretch farther than intention. "He destroyed himself," I said. "I just stopped catching him." She slapped the table. Hard. The sound echoed through the house like something breaking. The wood vibrated under my hands, familiar and suddenly fragile. "I chose him," she said. "I know." That was the hardest part to say, not because it wasn't true, but because I had known it long before she admitted it out loud. I had known it in the way she defended him too quickly, in the way her voice changed when his name entered a conversation, in the way she stopped asking my opinion and started informing me of decisions already made. She stood there for a long moment, shoulders tense, eyes wet but unyielding. She looked older than she had that morning, not wiser, just heavier. "I didn't ask you to do this," she said finally. "No," I replied. "You didn't. You could have warned me." "I did, just not in the way you wanted." Her mouth tightened. She nodded once, as if agreeing with something she didn't like but couldn't argue with. Then she turned and walked back down the hallway. This time the door did close harder, not a slam, but close enough to carry meaning. Then she left. I stood there after she was gone, listening to the quiet reassert itself. The house always did that. It absorbed emotion like old walls absorb smoke. It didn't judge. It didn't ask questions. It just held what happened and waited. Later that night, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. We need to talk. Tonight. I didn't respond. I poured a glass of water instead and drank it slowly. The clock on the wall ticked with deliberate indifference. Every second sounded louder after everything else had been stripped away. I thought about all the conversations I had already had without speaking. The meetings that would happen whether I attended or not. The apologies that would arrive carefully worded, trying to balance regret with self-preservation. The explanations that would pretend confusion instead of admitting recognition. People like to believe outcomes are sudden. They like to pretend there was a single moment when everything tipped. It makes them feel safer, as if vigilance alone could have prevented it. But this had been moving for years, quietly, patiently, with the kind of momentum that doesn't announce itself until it's too late to stop. The unknown number buzzed again. Please. I imagined who it might be. Him, maybe, scrambling for leverage he no longer had, or someone sent on his behalf tasked with salvaging what could be salvaged, or someone else entirely, someone who had watched from the sidelines and finally decided it was safe to step forward. I set the phone face down. When I finally went upstairs, I passed my daughter's old room. The door was closed, but I could picture it exactly as it had been. Posters taped too carefully to the walls, books stacked in uneven towers, the desk where she had once practiced signing her name over and over, testing futures she hadn't yet chosen. I wondered what version of me she would remember later, the quiet one who stayed too long, or the one who stopped absorbing impact and let the structure fail where it deserved to. Sleep came in fragments, short, shallow stretches interrupted by thoughts that refused to line up. I woke once convinced I had heard a knock, only to find the house still and dark. Another time, I dreamed of standing in a room full of mirrors, each one showing me at a different age, all of them watching without expression. In the morning, the phone was full again. Missed calls, messages that started formal and ended personal, people asking if I was all right, as if concern could erase complicity. I made coffee and drank it black. The bitterness felt appropriate. The unknown number texted once more. This doesn't have to go any further. I smiled at that. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. The belief that distance equals resolution, that silence can be negotiated after it has already spoken. I didn't reply. By midday, the tone shifted. Less urgency, more caution. Statements released without my input. Narratives forming that tried to soften edges and redirect blame. It didn't matter. The record existed now. Not the one written in press releases, but the one people carried privately, the one that adjusted how they interpreted every past interaction. That kind of record doesn't need maintenance. In the afternoon, my daughter called. I let it ring twice before answering. "I'm not apologizing," she said immediately. "I didn't ask you to." There was a pause. I could hear her breathing, measured and controlled. She had always been good at that. "He's saying you manipulated everything?" she continued. "He would," I said. Another pause. Longer this time. "Did you?" I leaned back in the chair and looked out the window. The light had shifted, clouds moving in, slow and heavy. "I told the truth," I said, "and then I stopped protecting the lie." She didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice was quieter. "I don't know what to do now." That was new, not the uncertainty itself, but the admission of it. "You don't have to decide today," I said. She exhaled, sharp and tired. "I'll call you later," she said. "I'll be here." After we hung up, I realized that was the first promise I had made in a long time that didn't require explanation. That evening, the unknown number stopped trying. No final message, no dramatic exit, just silence. The kind that suggests retreat rather than acceptance. I went outside as the sun dipped low, turning the sky a dull orange that felt more resigned than beautiful. I sat on the steps and listened to the neighborhood settle into night, doors closing, engines cutting off, someone arguing softly a few houses down, someone else laughing too loud, life continuing. I thought about the cost of all of it, not in money or reputation, but in distance. In the space that now existed between me and the people I had once tried to hold close by absorbing their mistakes. I wondered whether that space would ever close, or whether it was simply the shape of things now. I decided it didn't matter. Inside, the phone remained quiet. I didn't check it. I didn't need to. Whatever came next would come on its own schedule. I had already done my part. When I turned off the lights and went to bed, the house felt different. Not lighter, not heavier, just honest. Like something that had finally stopped pretending to be what it wasn't. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. He found me at the old warehouse, the first one. I hadn't told anyone I was going there, not because it was a secret, but because secrets imply protection. This place didn't need that. It had already been stripped down to what it was: concrete, rust, memory, and the residue of decisions made before anyone knew how expensive learning could be. The building sat at the edge of the industrial strip, half forgotten, half avoided. The city had grown around it and then past it, leaving it stranded like an early draft no one bothered to delete. The loading bays were scarred with dents from trucks that misjudged angles and drivers who learned too late that optimism doesn't move steel. The concrete still bore scars from early mistakes. Long hairline fractures ran like faint maps across the floor, filled with dust that never quite settled. In one corner, darker patches marked where something had once spilled and never been fully cleaned. No one remembered what it was anymore. That was the point. The ceilings were too low. Built before ambition learned to measure itself. You could feel the compression the moment you stepped inside, the way the space subtly told you not to stand too tall, not to assume permanence. The wiring had never quite been fixed. Conduits ran exposed along the walls, patched and repatched, each repair a compromise layered on top of the last. It smelled like cold metal and old oil, with a hint of damp that never left, no matter how many summers passed. I stood near the center bay, hands in my coat pockets, listening to the echo of my own breathing. This was where it started. Not the story people would tell later, but the real beginning. The place where efficiency hadn't yet replaced improvisation, where mistakes were loud and lessons were physical. When he walked in, I didn't turn right away. I didn't need to. His footsteps were uneven, too fast, then too slow. The sound of someone trying to arrive with purpose while carrying panic like extra weight. He stopped between two loading bays. The overhead lights there flickered occasionally, not enough to fail, just enough to irritate. His jacket was wrinkled, the fabric pulled and creased as if he had slept in it or clenched it too hard while sitting. The tie was gone, not loosened, gone. His collar was open, one side folded wrong. He looked smaller in that space, not physically, structurally, like someone who had always relied on framing, rooms, titles, proximity to hold him upright. "You win," he said. "What do you want?" There it was, the sentence he thought would end it, a concession shaped like a transaction. I turned then and looked at him properly. His eyes kept moving, scanning for angles, exits, witnesses that didn't exist. His hands hovered near his sides, unsure whether they were meant to gesture, defend, or plead. I stepped closer, not fast, not slow, just enough to collapse the distance he had counted on. "I want you to remember that chair," I said, "every time you sit down for the rest of your life." His face tightened. Confusion first, then recognition. He knew exactly which chair I meant, the one he had leaned on with false casualness, the one he had claimed without asking, the one he had used as a prop while taking something he assumed was already his. He laughed once, short, sharp, not amused. "That's it?" he said. "That's your big finish?" I didn't answer. Silence does more work when you let it. He moved suddenly, desperate, angry, the kind of motion that comes from realizing the rules you rehearsed don't apply anymore. He reached out, not aiming for anything specific, just trying to force contact, to turn the moment physical so he could believe he still understood it. I blocked him. Instinct, not effort. My body remembered things my mind no longer catalogued. We stumbled. Our shoes scraped against the concrete, the sound loud and clumsy in the open space. He tried to shove past me, misjudged the floor, the angle, the fact that the ground doesn't negotiate. He lost his footing and hit the floor hard. The sound was hollow in the open space, a dull impact that traveled up the walls and came back thinner, less impressive. He lay there for a moment, breath knocked out of him, eyes wide, mouth opening and closing without sound. Winded, shocked, humiliated. I stood over him, not looming, just present. The way gravity stands over everything, eventually. He tried to push himself up and failed. One hand slid against the dusty concrete, leaving a faint streak. He stopped trying and looked up at me instead. "This is where it ends," I said, not as a threat, not as a promise, as a statement of location. He didn't answer. His breathing slowed, uneven but steady enough to continue. His eyes shifted away, settling somewhere near the wall, as if looking directly at me required more strength than he had left. For a moment, I wondered if he would say something. An apology, maybe, or an accusation, or some last attempt at reshaping the narrative so he could leave believing he still controlled the meaning of it. He said nothing. I stepped back, gave him space, not out of kindness, but because proximity was no longer necessary. The lesson had already landed. "You can get up," I said, "or you can stay there until you remember how." He swallowed, nodded once. Slowly, he pushed himself upright, favoring one side, wincing when he put weight on his foot. He didn't look at me as he stood. "I don't want to see you again," he muttered. "That's up to you," I said. He limped toward the exit, pausing once as if he might turn back. He didn't. The door creaked when he pushed it open, a long complaining sound that felt older than either of us. Then it closed behind him. The warehouse settled. I stayed where I was for a while after he left. Long enough for the echoes to disappear. Long enough for the space to feel like itself again. This was where it ended. Not with applause, not with witnesses, just with an understanding that some things don't need to be rebuilt, and some places only exist to remind you how you started and why you learned to sit carefully afterward. The final meeting was brief, public, recorded, irreversible. It had been scheduled with a precision that left no room for negotiation, no private pre-briefings, no side conversations in hallways, no last-minute adjustments disguised as clarifications. The agenda had been circulated 3 times, each version identical, as if repetition could calm the nerves of the people who already knew how it would end. The room was larger than it needed to be. Glass walls, polished surfaces, microphones embedded into the table like permanent fixtures rather than tools. A camera mounted high in the corner blinked once when the system went live, a small red light that transformed every movement into a record. I arrived early. Not conspicuously so, just early enough to choose my pace instead of reacting to someone else's. A few people were already there, seated too neatly, hands folded, voices low. They looked up when I entered, then quickly looked away again, as if eye contact carried obligations they weren't prepared to meet. I didn't greet anyone, not out of hostility, but because greetings imply continuity. This was not that kind of moment. When the clock reached the hour, the remaining seats filled quickly. Papers shuffled, laptops opened and closed again, forgotten. Someone cleared their throat twice and then stopped. The air felt thin, conditioned to neutrality, but failing. I walked to the front of the room. Each step sounded louder than it should have, amplified by the quiet. The floor was carpeted, expensive and dense, designed to absorb sound. It didn't help. Nothing absorbs intent once it's in motion. I took the chair, the original one. It had been brought out deliberately, not hidden, not highlighted, just placed where it belonged, its presence subtle but unmistakable to anyone who understood context. The armrests were smooth from years of use. The seat bore a slight indentation, permanent and honest, shaped by repetition rather than force. I adjusted it once, not because it was uncomfortable, but because ritual matters. Then I sat. Across the room, near the back wall, he stood. No jacket this time. No tie. His posture was straight but brittle, like something held in place by habit rather than confidence. He didn't lean, didn't cross his arms, didn't pretend to belong where he was standing. He was silent, finished. I looked out at the faces. They were familiar, changed. People I had known for years, some for decades. People who had shared dinners, signed cards, sent careful messages when silence became noticeable. Their expressions were composed but not neutral. Relief showed in some, apprehension in others. A few looked almost disappointed, as if they had expected drama and found only resolution. "This company will move forward," I said, without confusion, without noise. My voice carried evenly, no emphasis, no performance. The microphones picked it up cleanly, the recording system translating sound into permanence. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. Every word beyond that would have been redundant, an attempt to soften what clarity had already done. I sat down. The chair accepted my weight without protest. It always had. There was a pause, not awkward, not long. Just enough for the room to register that nothing else was coming. No questions were invited. None were asked. From the back, he shifted. The movement was small but visible. A subtle recalibration of someone realizing they were no longer part of the equation. He looked toward the table once, then away. He turned and walked out. The door closed quietly behind him. No echo. No final sound to mark the moment. The camera continued recording for several seconds after he was gone, capturing the aftermath without commentary, people exhaling, shoulders lowering, pens finally touching paper. Someone reached for the control panel and ended the session. The red light went dark. I remained seated for a moment longer, not because I had to, but because endings deserve to be acknowledged before they're abandoned. Then I stood, nodded once to no one in particular, and left the room the same way I had entered it, without hurry, without hesitation, carrying nothing with me except the certainty that the chair would remain exactly where it was, waiting for someone else to decide how carefully they intended to sit.